Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and I'm excited for this week because we are talking with nonprofit organizations. And I have in studio with me here Betsy Fordyce. She is with the Rocky Mountain Children's Law Center, as well as Project Foster Power and lots of other nonprofit organizations. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Good.
And I also have Kim Dvorchak in with me, and she is with a, NACC is what I have, the National Association
Of Counsel for Children.
Of Counsel for Children. Thank you so much. So sorry about that. I do know what you do, I promise. So we're here to talk in the capacity of advocating for children, right? So let's give a little background for NACC and for Rocky Mountain Children's Law Center, as well as Project Foster Power and any other projects you're involved with.
Great.
Yeah, so we'll start here with NACC, again, National Association for Counsel for Children.
Thank you, Alex.
Yes.
And thank you very much to the Roundtable for having us. This is a really special opportunity for us to connect with the business community in Colorado. So we do appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Happy to
Thank you.
have this discussion.
Sure. Well, the National Association of Counsel for Children was founded right here in Denver, Colorado in 1977. By a handful of lawyers who wanted to make sure that the people who were representing children who were in abuse and neglect cases were properly trained, had the support they needed, and could do the best job in representing children, providing effective representation. At that time, it was 1977. There had just been passed a federal law a few years ago talking about the need to provide children with a guardian ad litem, and they wanted to make sure that the development of this field was in fact going to be a profession. And so NACC kind of evolved from a cause around children's legal advocacy to a profession where we now have lawyers across the country working to provide zealous representation. We have a training program. We certify lawyers as child welfare law specialists, and we advocate for children's legal issues across the country.
Awesome. So just a follow-up question as far as certifying is concerned, is that I imagine that we already have attorneys and it's an extra certification that you provide?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's called the Child Welfare Law Specialization, and it's designed to really elevate the quality of representation for children. So attorneys, in order to become certified, they have to have 3 years experience, they have to pass an exam, they have to study our course, and they have to really demonstrate that not only do they have the knowledge, but they have the skill, they have professional references, they have good professional conduct in the courtroom, and it's really designed to make sure that every child has the best lawyer possible when they're facing a court proceeding in this type of case.
Well, and I know as a civil person, just on my own, I want really good representation, and to make sure that a kid has that, you have to go above and beyond. So I love that you provide that special certification. And again, nationally, that works. Do you have to tailor that to each state?
Well, we provide a national overview. A lot of child welfare law is based on federal law. So there's quite a lot of federal law governing the process, governing, what type of placements children need to be put in. There's a lot of federal law designed to keep children in family settings. And so quite a bit of our curriculum is a national overview of that law, but we often partner with states like Colorado, and we will put on a training with the state, and we can do a 1 day on the federal law. The state can do a 1 day on a state law. So we really try to partner with state organizations and complement their training efforts.
Which is awesome, and that way you are making sure you're tailoring under specific laws to states.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about Rocky Mountain Children's Law Center. So I assume that you guys are partners, but I don't want to put any words in anyone's mouth.
Yeah, Kim and I have the opportunity to work on a lot of projects together over the years. So yes, definitely partners in the work. And we, focus specifically here in Colorado. We have been around for 36 years now as a nonprofit. We're an office of attorneys and social workers and other support staff who are really dedicated to providing advocacy for youth and their families when they're experiencing trauma. And so a lot of our history has been very similar to what Kim has talked about in terms of having attorneys for kids in abuse and neglect types of cases. But we've kind of opened that up, and we have an array of other program areas now, and I'd love to mention a couple of those. So first and foremost, we have a legal advocacy department. And throughout that, there's a few different areas where we represent kids and families. So we have an education advocacy program. So when kids have experienced trauma, sometimes they can't maintain in school settings the way that their peers might. And so we provide advocacy for kids and their families so that they have the supports they need to be successful in school. We have a domestic violence program. So we get appointed in Denver County Court specifically in civil protection order cases. So when there is domestic violence between the parents, we're appointed to talk to the court about what's best for the kids in those situations. We have a caregiver program, and so we represent non-parents. It could be aunts, uncles, cousins, foster parents, relatives, and other capacities. And we're helping them to get some sort of legal stability for kids. So if a parent's not able to take care of their kid and maybe they drop them off at grandma's house, we want grandma to have the legal security to be able to get them enrolled in school and get them medical and all the other pieces. So we work in that area. And then the other newer program to us that's new in this last year is a civil legal services program for former foster and homeless young people. So it specifically focuses on 18 to 25-year-olds who are transitioning into adulthood and facing all kinds of different struggles and barriers, often without a lot of supports and connections. And we're representing them in cases like name change or eviction or public assistance claims and kind of all of those extra legal areas to remove those barriers so then they could be more successful in their adulthood.
Which is exciting. As somebody who was raised in a two-parent home, I had that support 18 to 25, but it was still a huge leap. They kind of pull the rug out from under you and they're like, okay, you're an adult now. And you're like, what? So I can't imagine coming from a home where I really didn't have stability to begin with and trying to make it as an adult on top of that. So that's a really cool program that you've implemented.
Yeah. I mean, we recognized for a long time through a lot of the advocacy that Kim's talked about that the outcomes that we have in Colorado, the outcomes that we have nationally for these young people are not always where we want them to be. And that there were all these gaps in services, specifically around civil legal services. And so this was an area that we could provide support and some extra attention.
Wonderful. I love that. Let's talk a little bit about Project Foster Power.
Project Foster Power.
Yes. Yeah, I love the grin that you have when I bring up the name. You're clearly very excited about this one.
I am excited. It is the kind of the main part of my job every day. And I get to support a group of young people who are really trying to change the world. So they are a group of 15 to 25-year-olds. They're either currently in the foster care system or they were previously in the foster care system, and they're coming together through youth organizing or community organizing type models to create policy change, to create public awareness and really spread the word and improve the system. And so we launched in the spring, late spring or early summer of 2017, so we're just a little over a year old. And it's been exciting to see it come together and to see young people really energized by the work. So one of the interesting pieces of it is that it's youth-led. So as the adult supporter, I get to provide the skills and the connections and kind of the teaching moments of the program, but it's young people who are saying this is what needs to change, and it's young people that are taking action on those issues, and that's really powerful to us.
Well, when you get a group like that, right, people that have been in that world, those are the people you need to ask about what needs to be changed. I like to consider it along the lines of when you're in a restaurant business. As the CEO, if you've never worked in a restaurant before, you don't know what needs to be changed in the restaurant. Like, people really never order this menu item. Can we please get rid of it and make something else? Right?
It's exactly right. I mean, we have so many really well-intentioned professionals in this work, whether they're lawyers or caseworkers or administrators or treatment providers. But at the end of the day, we don't know what's best for these kids all the time, and we're trying to make those determinations. And this is saying, hey, we should follow their lead because they actually do know. Yeah. We have a young person in our program, and she's always given me permission to share this analogy because I thought it was so amazing. But she says that, adults are always saying, like, I need to hear it from the horse's mouth, like, directly. And she's like, we're the horse. Why don't people ask us, right? And that's what this program is about, is like, let's go to the source. Let's really talk about what's going on with these young people and then make the changes that need to happen.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
I think so, too.
Yeah, I love that. I love the foresight. So what other programs are you involved in?
So those are a lot of our core programs at the Law Center. We also, the Law Center also has some support programs. So we do a multidisciplinary team where some of our staff members who have clinical experience kind of consult on the lawyer side. Because I know as a lawyer, I went to law school to learn the law, but I didn't necessarily learn all of the other social justice issues that impact our families. And so it's a way to get that more holistic perspective. We also do a lot of policy work, both kind of in the state level and in partnership with others, kind of on the national level, to really try to change the way our systems look. And with the General Assembly session approaching, that will be a really busy time for us.
Yes, I may have to get you in here for a follow-up after that General Assembly.
Absolutely.
Yes. So Kim, why did you decide to get into nonprofit work? You clearly have a law background here, but this obviously spoke to you, and as I've mentioned, you both have big smiles on your faces. Clearly work that means a lot to you, but what started you down this path?
You know, I think probably what Betsy and I both have in common is that we really believe in youth, and we really believe in the opportunities for every child, and I think that's just such a driving motivator. I began this work as a public defender, actually, in Colorado. I was a public defender in Colorado Springs, and I represented children who were accused of crimes. At that time, in the mid-90s, it wasn't considered a specialty to represent children. It was just a pass-through stage on your way to developing experience as a public defender. And what I came to learn over the course of my years in practice was that it really takes specialized training, specialized knowledge to represent children. There's a reason why pediatricians care for children in the medical field. There's a reason why we have pediatric dentists. It should be the same thing for lawyers. And so I really came to embrace that if we are going to represent children, we need to understand adolescent development. We need to understand what works for them, what treatment works for them, and we need to make sure that the legal community is held accountable to that. So over my years of practice, I eventually became involved in policy advocacy, and I actually founded the Colorado Juvenile Defender Center, which was created similarly to the Rocky Mountain Children's Law Center to advocate for children in the juvenile justice system. And after several years of successful legislative advocacy and other efforts, I was sort of recruited to the national stage and started working on a national level to really improve access to counsel and quality for representation, both on the juvenile justice side, and now I'm focused on the child welfare side, where it's a little bit less developed in terms of the representation of children than on the criminal defense side. There was a seminal U.S. Supreme Court decision called In Re Galt over 50 years ago that said children who are accused of crimes have a constitutional right to counsel.
Yeah.
We don't have that in the child welfare system. There's no Supreme Court decision that says children have a constitutional right to counsel. There's no federal law that requires children have a right to counsel. So there's a lot of work that we need to do on the national level to ensure that there are fundamental rights for children in child welfare who are facing extreme liberty deprivations. I mean, a caseworker is coming into your home, taking you out of your home, taking you out of your school, taking you out of your community, taking you away from your siblings, and putting you in a stranger's home or in a group care home. It could be a good place for you, but that's a very serious traumatic impact on your life. And we want to make sure that lawyers are trained to do exactly what Betsy is describing, to talk to their clients, to listen to them, to find out what do they want, what are their goals. And so I'm motivated now as a nonprofit leader to sort of multiply the effect of what an individual lawyer can do. That as a state leader or as a national leader, we can influence the direction of legal advocacy for children and really try to accelerate progress and making sure every child has a lawyer, that lawyer knows exactly how to access benefits for that child and get them on the right path to success.
That's beautiful. And I love, you made such a simple point, but I think it's worth repeating, is that we have child pediatrics, right? Pediatric dentistry. We have child psychologists. We have separated kids in every other aspect, even by far as giving them a lawyer when criminal acts are involved. But as far as welfare goes, it's something that slipped through the cracks. So I think that you have a great platform behind you, and I really hope we get some stuff done in this next few years.
Yes, yes. Well, Colorado is actually one of the better states on that spectrum. Colorado has a statewide agency that oversees representation for children, and Colorado law does guarantee that every child will have a lawyer appointed to them. So we're lucky in Colorado that we have that type of leadership and partnership, but what we want to do is spread that across the country.
Absolutely. So, Betsy, you've got a plethora of programs and organizations that you're involved with, but what motivated you to get behind that?
Well, initially, I went to law school because I really just cared about my community and social justice issues. I'd done a lot of work with homeless kids before, and I thought, oh, the law might be useful to know, if I want to try to work on these areas. And then once I got to law school and I really saw this profession that Kim's talking about, and that you could take kind of the training and the thought process and analysis of being a lawyer and work with kids and families and really see the impact there, that was really compelling to me. And so I initially came to the Children's Law Center almost a little over 10 years ago now, and I kind of stayed in that path ever since law school. And it's because I believe in kids and families. It's because I believe that we really can make an impact. And for the first 7+ of those years, I was doing that kind of day-to-day courtroom work that Kim has talked about as an attorney for kids and child welfare cases. And then in the last few years have really stepped into more of that policy and training space and highlighting young people's voices, because I think that's been a missing piece in a lot of the work, and I'm hoping that we can change that trajectory.
Wonderful. I love that you guys are both so motivated, and I think we're going to see big things soon.
Hope so.
Speaking of that, we're going to switch focus a little bit here, and we're going to talk about the need for the advocacy specifically, right? We briefed over that a little bit, but I really want to dig our heels into why it's so important for the welfare, right? We know that kids always have access to attorneys when there's criminal acts involved, which great, but also a little sad, right? That it's more focused on the criminal acts rather than the welfare. So let's hone in on exactly why the advocacy is necessary.
Sure. Well, just to give kind of a national overview, there are now 443,000 children in foster care every day in the United States. And that number has been increasing for the last 5 years. So increasing over the last 5 years. It has steadily increased to the point where we have almost 500,000 children in foster care today. And if you look at how many children are served over the course of 1 year, 690,000 children are in our foster care system at one point during the year in the United States. And what we do know is that about 60% of those children end up in a stranger foster home, or they end up in a group home where there's multiple children living in that same home, or a residential treatment facility. We try to train lawyers to understand what type of placement does that child need. And what we know is that what they need is to be with a family.
Yeah.
Number one, they need to be with their family. So we're trying to influence, national policy and national practice to make sure that everyone is looking at that child's family. How do we look at their strengths? How do we bring services to the home? Is there a way to bring services to the home so we're not removing the child from the home? Is there a kinship placement? Is there an aunt, an uncle, or a grandparent, someone who can, take custody of that child temporarily or maybe even permanently in adoption? There's over 120,000 children waiting to be adopted right now, and there was just under that number reunified with their parents this last year. So we have a lot of work to do to bring children and keep them into family settings. There's been quite a bit of legislation on the federal level to do that, to try to change the way we are providing treatment to families, to look at it as more of a preventative measure, to bring services into the home, if it's drug treatment that's needed, if it's rent for a month. If there's a way we can keep this family from becoming homeless, then we can probably also keep them out of the child welfare system. Because as we know, the outcomes aren't always great. Unfortunately, I can, read some statistics here, but if you look at the young people who are later in sex trafficking business, 80% of them came out of the foster care system. If you look at who is in the juvenile justice system, 60% or 70% came out of the foster care system. Only 1 out of 4 foster children are in college by the time they're 19. And, you know, 1 in 4 become homeless. So there's a lot that we need to do to make sure every child in this country has access to an advocate who, one, understands the importance of keeping children in families in a family setting and is working every single day to secure those services, you know, for those children and for those families, and also help them get benefits for education, for housing. You know, education is a big issue. Every time a child is moved from their home or moved between placements, they lose 4 to 6 months of academic progress. So how do we, as advocates, you know, get more involved in their educational outcomes and get more involved in keeping their credits, you know, in preserving their credits and making sure they're getting credits even despite various moves that they may experience?
Oh, well, I definitely think we need a movement on the education system as far as that's concerned, for sure. But those are shocking statistics. I think the one that probably bothered me most was that first of all, we have almost 500,000 kids that reside in foster care or group homes at this moment. That is shocking and sad. And the fact that only about less than 100,000 of those kids were reunited with their families, right? I guess I have so many questions about how obviously everyone has a different circumstance for how they end up in foster care. But getting out is a process, right? And that's where you guys come into play. So I guess take me a little bit on this journey. We're going to have to continue this in the next segment, quite obviously. But for now, what you can say about starting this process to helping kids get out of the foster care or the group homes that they're in.
Well, I think one piece ties into what a lot of Kim has been saying today around attorneys for kids. So when we have a court intervention with the family, when the Department of Human Services gets involved, everyone in the case is going to get an attorney here in Colorado, and everyone has a job to do to kind of make sure the right services and options are available for families so that hopefully we end a case in reunification, and the court's going to make those decisions. But kids need advocates to do that. Parents need advocates that are going to argue for the right treatment for their clients. And so all of the pieces kind of have to align to make sure that we're keeping in mind the needs of the kids, the parents' treatment issues, and really like how are we moving closer to permanency and stability for kids, which is an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. So a lot of these kids, again, they are in foster and group homes. What's the main reason, if you have one at all, why families don't step up? The aunts, the uncles, the grandparents. I would imagine aging sometimes plays a role. But yeah, what's the main reason that a lot of families don't get involved? Do we know why?
I can't say that it's any one single reason. I mean, there are a number of factors involved. And, we should say that the children who end up in the foster care system come from a range of circumstances. So if you look at the spectrum of cases that are in the abuse neglect system, about 12% of those involve physical abuse, 4% involve sexual abuse, but then you have an even greater section, 36% involves drug abuse within the home, but over 60% of the cases are what's called neglect. And that can be a very wide-ranging, pattern of behavior or just circumstances of poverty. And so I think that's an area where we really want to be focusing in on is what is the definition of neglect? How can we address that in a more preventative way so that we're not removing the children from the home? And how can we break down barriers to kinship care that maybe are due to licensing restrictions that require a certain number of bedrooms or, square footage or windows or, there's oftentimes a disparity in what a family member will be paid to keep a child in their home versus what a group home will be paid to keep a child. So how do we shift resources so that they're going into supporting keeping that child in that family home? If there's a medically fragile child and there's a foster parent willing to stay home with that child, let's put the resources there. Let's support that family. Let's not put that child in a medical facility. So it's really looking at the resources and how do we change our policies so that we're shifting those to support families and family settings and not kind of these external substitute care situations.
Awesome. I'm getting so much information here. I really appreciate this. But we're going to come back after this break. So stay with us here on Connect and Collaborate. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Check out this podcast and more at cobrt.com/radio-podcast. And we'll be right back. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and I'm just going to jump right into the show because I'm so excited. I'm learning so much, and I definitely want to see people get involved with child advocacy. I have, again, in studio with me, Kim Dvorchak. She is with the National Association of Counsel for Children, which I got right this time. And I also have Betsy Fordyce. She is with Rocky Mountain Children's Law Center, as well as Project Foster Power. So we were talking in the last segment a little bit about, you mentioned neglect is one of the reasons. 60%, I believe you said. 63%. Maybe.
62%.
62%. It's close. So 62% of your cases tend to be neglect. And so in my mind, I'm thinking of maybe that mom that's working 3 jobs and she's not quite at home when her 9, 8, 10-year-old gets home from school and maybe a neighbor's called. Am I on the right path? What? And I know that neglect isn't exactly defined. There has to be a definition constitutionally, but I'm sure there's more nuances than that.
You know, I think that's part of what states are looking at right now, as well as the federal government, is how are we defining neglect, and to make sure that we're not defining it as something that equates to poverty. You know, that it's if we had childcare in America for every family that needed it, you know, if there was housing in America for every family that needed it, we might be able to reduce the number of these cases considerably, because you know, lack of supervision can be an area of neglect. And I should say, you know, neglect can be very serious. Right. You know, neglect can be pose safety risks for children, multiple children in the house. You know, they can often intersect with drug abuse if there's a parent who's using substances. That can also intersect with neglect cases. But there can also be cases where it's a little fuzzy in terms of whether or not there's really child maltreatment involved, or whether that family just needs to avoid homelessness, or, you know, get out of a shelter and get into a more stable situation.
Yeah, which I think I should maybe back up a little bit on my thoughts on that. Certainly, by no means am I throwing this mom that has to work 3 jobs under a bus. And we talked on the break a little bit here, Betsy, about how typically what would happen in that situation is you would go outside of court to kind of deal with that and provide resources.
I think across the country we're seeing a lot of prevention models that are trying to meet the needs of families without getting to the extent of needing court involvement and all of these attorneys and all of the different pieces. And so a lot of our counties here have programs where, you know, if they get a call like that, they might make some referrals for mom to have some supports and services so that she doesn't come into the system. You know, if it is a matter of resources and not real kind of abuse and neglect, we don't want those kids involved in the cases. We want parents to be able to parent their kids without having to get all of like the rest of us involved. And so I think our courts, or I should say our counties, are really mindful of that.
Wonderful. We're going to switch gears just a little bit here. And I know that we have some personal stories, particularly from foster children that have lived through it. And these are coming from your project Foster Power, right?
Yes.
Which, again, these are 15 to 25-year-olds. So they're becoming adults. And they're coming into society, and they've already had the past. They've kind of graduated past that, like, maybe mental stigma, a little bit of, oh no, this is just happening, to a place of, okay, this has happened, this is my life now. Where do I go from here?
I think our kids that are older in the system have trauma before they get to us. You know, that's the abuse and neglect that brought them to us. And then they have trauma for being in care because they're in foster care and they're not doing the same thing as their peers, and they have different rules and obligations, and they're not connected to friends and family. And so there's so many pieces to it. But one of the things that we see kind of before I read the stories is just that these outcomes, as Kim's kind of alluded to, are so significant. And we're not just talking about little kids. We're talking about kids, young adults who are really about to be members of our community all around us, that are moving into their first apartments, that are, you know, pursuing school, that are getting their first jobs, and have to figure out how to make it, often without all the connections that many of us benefited from when we were younger. And so, you know, in Colorado specifically, you know, Kim alluded to education issues. There's a 4-year graduation rate, which is I want to say 78% for Colorado youth generally, and for youth in foster care, that's 23%. So 23% of youth in foster care in Colorado are graduating high school within 4 years. That's a pretty substantial difference. And when we're talking about earning a living wage and being able to afford housing in this market and everything else, all of those pieces are really difficult. And so certainly we need greater advocacy, we need greater programming, and I know there's a lot going on in those conversations here in Colorado. But Project Foster Power has really tried to say, we as this group of young people aren't going to fix all of the issues of where you're going to sleep tonight, but we are going to teach you to use your voices. We're going to teach you the power that you have as an individual and really the power that you have in connecting with one another. And that's been the beauty of this program. I
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I know that you have a couple stories here. I'd love to hear them. And they are from actual youths. I was going to say youth children. That have been in the foster care system or are currently in.
They are. So Project Foster Power in their initial year picked an issue for action that they referred to as youth voice, youth choice. So they heard from over 120 young people in their first year that young people in this system didn't feel like they had a voice or a choice in what was happening to them. So as part of that campaign, they did a letter tour where they had youth write letters about either a time when their voice was heard and the power of that, or a time that they wished adults had maybe listened a little bit better. And so we collected over 100 letters. They've been displayed in some of the libraries here around town, some of the government offices, just to raise awareness for these voices. So I have a couple of those letters here today.
Yes.
And I'll read the first. Dear adult, during my time in care, I was listened to because I forced people to listen to me. The force in being heard was both empowering and painful. It hurt me that you didn't just listen because it was my life, my world, my family that was being torn apart. You empowered me by forcing me to force you because I discovered my own power and I uncovered the true meaning of perseverance. So thank you for making me stronger and thank you for making me loud because today I am doing better than you ever thought I would be doing. But for future reference, I have a few things for you to remember. It's my life. My voice not only matters, but it's powerful. Foster kids are people too. We need patience, empathy, and at least one person believing in us no matter what, just like you do. Just because I was full of anger, just because I was stubborn, doesn't mean I wasn't broken and scared. If you could have listened a little more and told a little less, maybe I could have trusted and been honest a lot sooner. I matter. We all matter. And now that I've grown up a little bit, I see that you matter too. From a young person who matters.
That is powerful.
It is powerful.
That is powerful. And
That's awesome.
It hurts to see that somebody had to write down that they matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There are not any sort of lack of really well-intentioned and good people doing this work. But our young people don't always feel it the same way that they would in their own families. And they don't always get to have a say because we're all busy. And if they can't do something, we don't always sit down and say, let us explain why we can't do this for you. And so there's a lot of research out there actually that says that young people that are in our systems, by the time they leave our systems, are pretty disconnected because they've kind of been outsiders while everybody's making decisions about them. And now they don't know how to be insiders. And so when they enter communities, that's one of the issues that we see. And this is really about giving them connection with each other so that they can hear they're not alone. When they see these letters, there's 100 other letters just like it, right? And they can see from other people I wasn't the only one.
Yeah, I love that you're displaying these not only for other foster kids to see, but for the community to know, right? It's not every day that I think about the foster system and the kids that are a part of that system. That's where you both reside in, right? That's your domain. And so that is something that impacts you every day. But to see this out and about in government buildings and libraries, I think it's a reminder that, hey, the system's broken a little bit. We need you to help be an advocate.
Right.
Yeah. Would you like to read the second letter?
Sure, I'll read the second one. Dear adult, I was in a bad home, and I was brave enough to not only speak up for myself, but for the other girls that weren't receiving food, clothing, and other necessities. I came to you when it seemed no one else was listening. I put my trust in you, but you did not do the same for me. The day you disregarded my truth, my needs, and my importance was the same day I did. From a young person who matters.
Wow.
Yeah.
That one's
This one's intense. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot to break down in that.
And I think a lot of this letter is one that our other youth reference a lot because they say, it speaks so much for me, and it was so short but succinct in terms of its message, powerful in its message. And I think it's just a matter of feeling like they need a place in the world and really wanting other people to hear that and to connect. And it's true for youth in foster care. It's true for youth out of foster care, right? They need people to believe in them and to listen to them and all of those other pieces. And it's really important for the kids that are in our system.
It is very important. And if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, it comes into play a lot here. That base is just food, water, shelter. And then the next is love, and then trust is in there too. And it's one of the lower ones on the pyramid, right? It's so tough to know, shockingly this way, how untrusted they feel. I don't think I would have associated that with foster care. Yes, mental anguish and abuse and not feeling heard. Those are things that I can see, but the trust being taken out from under you, that's tough.
Right.
That's really tough.
And it's really important for professionals to hear this too. I think a lot of the attorneys, judges, social workers, they're doing this job day in and day out. They're doing the best they can, but sometimes they just need to be reminded of who they need to listen to, and they need to slow down and ask the right questions. And every year NACC puts on a national conference where we bring together attorneys from across the country really to motivate them and inspire them to up their game and continue their zealous advocacy. And this last year we had several young people on the stage who were in foster care, and those are some of the most powerful presentations I think our attorneys always cite to. And I think it's a really important part of attorney training is to hear the voices of young people and be reminded that, oh yes, I must slow down and ask and listen and understand exactly what their goals are and partner with them to achieve those goals.
Yes, that's gosh, you guys are doing such great work, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. Yes, when you're in the nitty-gritty of dealing with public policy and changing laws and things like that, and making sure that your court cases are heard and given the correct justice to, sometimes you got to step back and listen to the emotional side of it. It's not all black and white. Yeah. We're going to switch gears one more time here. And you mentioned, again, that for your Project Foster Power, that 15 to 25-year-old kids, so we're looking at almost adults and well into adulthood. Well, not well into adulthood, I should say.
Into the early years.
Yes, exactly. The prefrontal cortex is being completed.
Still cooking.
Yes, exactly. But that has an economic driver behind it, right? And so this is where I think we want to get our business audiences involved. Why should they care? Why should they be an advocate? Because there are detrimental economic effects to kids that remain in the foster system for as long as they do. So if you want to attest to that,
Absolutely.
I'd appreciate it. Yeah.
Kind of speaking on more of the national level, because I think that's where we know our numbers best from.
Fair.
In terms of how we've kind of gathered it over time. But there was a study that was done a few years ago by the Jim Casey Youth Opportunity Initiative, and it looked at one kind of cohort of young people exiting into the world, and that was about 26,000 young people across the country. And it really only looked at three kind of markers or outcomes. So one was like early pregnancy, one was criminal justice involvement, and one was lack of education, like GED diploma. And it compared just those three, not all the other factors, just those three, the kind of economic effect of those young people versus their peers. And just across those three areas, they estimate that for that one group of 26,000 young people, it was going to cost our communities almost $8 billion over the course of their lifetime.
Wow.
So if we think about that like year after year, we still have about 20,000 young people who are leaving across the country. It's a lot of money that's adding up. Those are kids that are not only having kind of lost income and lost contributions in that way, but the effects of, public assistance programs and homelessness and all of these other things that our communities are paying for. And so thinking about like how do we shift that money upstream to meet the needs better and to provide those better services so we're not all dealing with that, nationally and here in Colorado.
Yeah, that's shocking. $8 billion over their lifetime. That's absolutely shocking. And again, all of the things that are impacted: employment, education, homelessness, right? Those are huge factors that play a role into this.
Absolutely.
Yes. So we talked a little bit about the reauthorization of Child Abuse and Prevention Act. And again, that goes along with, it ties in with the neglect of the definition of neglect. Do you mind jumping in a little bit more and giving us a little more meat on what exactly that entails?
Sure. So the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act is referred to as CAPTA, and it's the big piece of federal legislation that is really the only piece of federal legislation that specifically looks at child abuse and neglect. And it provides funding for states to provide services to both prevent child abuse and neglect as well as treat and address child abuse and neglect. So it's a pretty comprehensive law that's now looking at being reauthorized. It is up for reauthorization.
Okay.
And so that gives the whole policy advocacy community an opportunity to take a look at how are we currently defining neglect, how are we currently funding services, how are we providing for legal advocacy. And one of the areas in that law that the National Association of Counsel for Children is trying to change is that it currently does not require legal representation by an attorney. What the law says is that a child can be appointed either a volunteer lay advocate or a CASA or a guardian ad litem, and that guardian ad litem can be a lay volunteer or an attorney. So the law says that right now, if a child is in this situation, states can choose. They can give them a lay advocate who can, understand that child, perhaps, assist in getting services for that child. But a lay advocate can't file motions, can't have a hearing, can't, put a witness on the stand, can't question a caseworker as to, well, did you visit all of these other places where this child could live? Or did you look into whether you could, get an extra bed in grandma's house? There are a lot of things that a non-lawyer simply can't do in the courtroom. And so we don't want the important role that CASAs and lay advocates play to be conflated with legal representation. Legal representation is very specific. It's like pediatrics. It is a very specific legal field that requires legal representation. So we have a little bit of information on our website, naccchildlaw.org, talking about CAPTA and that it's up for reauthorization. And we will be providing more information as the policy develops. It's still a work in progress in terms of what the provisions will look like, but we are hoping that the Colorado community and other communities will support our efforts in ensuring that every child has access to a lawyer and a special lay advocate as well.
Which is awesome, right? Because I would imagine that load is heavy going into a case like that. And so you need somebody that can have the legalese and somebody else that can handle the emotional and intricacies of
Right.
the child going through this.
Exactly.
Yeah, so partnering up, I think, is
Exactly.
best bet.
That
Yeah.
is the best practice. You need a team. You can't have, too few people looking out for the best interest of the child, as long as the child's voice is not getting lost in the process. I think that's important.
Yes, very much so. One thing I want to ask here is, as a listener, I know that I could probably donate to one of your organizations, right? But policy-wise, how can I get involved?
I think policy-wise, you can get involved in different advocates that are taking place in Colorado. I mean, if you're interested in Colorado specifically, I would recommend reaching out to the Rocky Mountain Children's Law Center and finding out what are some advocacy efforts. I think the business community could really be a powerful voice, because who does the legislature hear when these bills happen? They hear from us. They hear from the child advocates and the people who they anticipate hearing. But if they heard from a business leader who said, look, I care about the fact that I'm going to need employees in my company, and I want to see Colorado do more to support these young people so that I can hire them for my business. I think that would be a very powerful voice both in Colorado and on a national stage. You know, we currently have in Colorado a governor-elect who is still a congressperson who people could call and ask to support the reauthorization of CAPTA and to include children's representation in that. So I think there are a number of policy advocacy efforts both on the local level and on the state level, and business leaders in Colorado, I think, are welcome to reach out to either of us to talk about their interests and how we can help, you know, engage them in this work.
Yes. So go ahead.
I was going to say, from Project Foster Power's perspective, they just chose their issue for action for 2019. So young people have said that sibling connections is incredibly important to them, either being placed with their siblings or having contact with their siblings when they're in care. And so we're hoping to propose a bill, and we're looking for sponsors now to figure out how to do a Bill of Rights around sibling issues here in Colorado. Our friends in Oregon, our friends in Minnesota have figured this out. We're kind of following their lead to figure out how to do it here. And so that's certainly an area where people could pay attention. Project Foster Power and our youth have things on, every kind of social media site possible, and you could follow along their progress in that way.
Wonderful. So let's talk about, when is this reauthorization happening? When do I need to contact Governor-elect Polis to let him know? Hey,
Well, sooner than later.
yes, obviously.
Definitely sooner than later. It's hard to predict in politics when things will actually happen. An example is last year, the Family First Prevention and Services Act, which is a major new piece of federal legislation, came down in the omnibus budget package in December of 2017 that we weren't expecting to happen. So it's possible it could happen by the end of this year, and we would encourage people to, start reaching out. On our website, we list the committees, and we link to the 2 committees that would be hearing any CAPTA reauthorization. But if not this year, then certainly within, the first half of 2019. So we'll have more information about that on our website moving forward.
Check out that website and make sure you call Governor-elect Polis. I also wanted to ask here about that bill. I imagine you need some sponsors, and this is a great place to ask the business people to be on board with that. So what kind of message do you want to send to our business listeners?
Right now, we're reaching out to different representatives who are different legislators who've been friendly to young people's issues and really care about those things. And so trying to see who might be on board to float kind of this sibling package. We have some laws in Colorado that protect sibling relationships, but our young people are feeling like they don't go far enough. And so this is really an opportunity for us to figure out how to keep those connections. We know that sibling relationships are so important even into adulthood, and we want to make sure that our kids are in care have the same connections.
Awesome. And what is your website that I can find more information?
So you can either go to the Children's Law Center website, which is www.childlawcenter.org, or you can go to Project Foster Power's social media pages. So if you search for Project Foster Power, we're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and our youth always share updates that way.
That's awesome. And I love, I'm sure that is a great platform, actually, for your youth to get their stories out there.
Absolutely.
And they feel connected. That's wonderful. So I have just a couple minutes here. Any last thoughts, any lasting words that we want to leave with our audience to make sure that they're calling their representatives and senators and any businesses that we want to make sure that they're supporting these bills and things like that? What lasting words do we want to leave?
I think I would ask, of course, we're here as nonprofit organizations, and we're focusing a lot on Colorado Gives Day, and I would hope that the business community would also consider contributing to our organizations. I think they would appreciate the expertise that we bring to these issues and want to support us. As I said, the numbers are rising for the number of children in foster care. We can't wait. We have to double our efforts. We have to accelerate our efforts. The National Association of Counsel for Children just passed a new 5-year strategic plan. So we are mobilizing to cover this country and to make sure that every child across this country has access to an attorney. But just like any business, we need infrastructure. We need some startup fees. We need some cost support to help us build the capacity that can really amplify our message and maximize our impact.
Wonderful.
I would say it's two things. It's one, finding ways to give either of your time or your talents, because certainly as a nonprofit, we need that support. But we also have lots of opportunities to support the young people of Project Foster Power. So it might be that you have a business that could donate printing services for their materials, or you have a restaurant that wants to sponsor an event, or any of these types of in-kind supports would be really helpful. And then the second piece is just know these kids. They're in your communities. We don't talk about these issues very often, and it's a critical time to really think about those things.
It is a really critical time. Well, thank you so much, ladies. It has been a pleasure. I've learned a lot today, and hopefully we get some momentum going in the next legislative session that happens. So thank you for joining me. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You too.
You too.